My name is Scott Kellner. I'm the editor and translator of the Cambridge University edition of my opposition, The Diary of Friedrich Kellner, a German against the Third Reich. And I am the grandson of Friedrich and Pauline Kellner. The unique significance of this primary source document from the Nazi period is that the author wasn't just seeking to make a record of events of what was occurring in his own time, but he also wanted to provide future generations, to provide us with a weapon of truth, as Friedrich called it, to be used against our own Nazis, neo-Nazis, and terrorists. When you consider how our world is ablaze in war and terror, with a large portion of it waged by religious zealots battling each other for territory and terrorizing innocent people everywhere, World War III seems very probable. What Friedrich Kellner wrote, which he did while he was under surveillance by the Gestapo for speaking out against the Nazis, what he wrote are very hard truths about what should have been done when World War II was still only in the probable stage, what should have been done to have kept that war from happening. A war that Winston Churchill called the unnecessary war. Unnecessary. To which Churchill added, there never was a war more easy to stop. I use the term hard truths because what Friedrich wrote are the kinds of things most politicians don't like to think about and don't want to act upon because for them, the status quo is preferable to any action that might impair their chances for re-election. When Adolf Hitler first came to power in 1933 and began building up Germany's military forces, he gave a melodramatic speech that was sent out into the world, his peace speech. He said, "While we are devoted in boundless love and faith to our own people and culture, we respect at the same time the national rights of other people, and we want with all our hearts to live with them in peace and friendship." When this same man's armies were brutally occupying most of Europe in the most destructive and murderous war in history, Friedrich Kellner wrote, "The wolf clothed himself in sheepskin because he was not fully armed. Hitler played the peace-loving statesman, and the world allowed itself to be deceived. Hitler duped the entire world. He had the great, unbelievable luck to meet with weak and vacillating and cowardly opponents." Friedrich pointed out how Germany and Italy and Japan could not have built up their arms without purchasing what they needed from the countries they then attacked. He wrote, "Germany would not have been in the position to attack Europe had it not received the necessary raw materials from England and America. The democracy supplied the dictatorships and then just watched while these aggressor nations signaled their preparations for war. Where were the statesmen in the attacked countries?" Friedrich wanted to know. Where were the men who could recognize the reality? Did they not see the tremendous rearming of Germany when every German illustrated newspaper had pictures that showed everything? Every small child here knew at least something about the armaments, and the entire world looked on? Poor world. Germany openly violated the provisions of the Versailles Treaty that it had agreed to after losing the First World War, another war they started, a treaty that specifically limited their military powers so they wouldn't start any more wars. And Friedrich asked angrily, what was done to stop Germany's development of brigades of stormtroopers and SS squadrons? And when German children, beginning on their 10th birthday, were militarized in the Hitler Youth and in the League of German Girls. At 10, they feel the breath of militarism and are not released from its claws until the mass grave. What did your Houses of Commons and your Senates undertake against this power? The French watched calmly as Hitler rearmed Germany. Hitler clearly designated France in his book Mein Kampf as the hereditary enemy. Didn't the French believe that? It's impossible to fight a dictator by democratic methods, waiting for the other guy to strike the first blow. The stronger one will triumph. Will a heavyweight fighter let himself be beaten by an opponent who only rolls his eyes at him? Or does it require a good punch? Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain and the entire English government are to blame for not having taken equivalent steps when they discovered Germany's preparations for war. I will not reproach Chamberlain for espousing peace, but he should have been a parson in a small village. As the foremost statesman of a world power, he had the duty and obligation to ensure any attack would be immediately countered. The Western powers will carry the historical guilt for not promptly providing the most intensive preventive measures against Germany's incessant politics of aggression. Possibilities existed, but no actions were taken. Spineless policies do not change the mind of a tyrant. The sharpest means would still be too mild. By the time these Englishmen wake up, the greater part of Europe will be a heap of rubble, and if Hitler wins, there will be an enormous slave empire with the name Europe. A major reason for the failure to take timely preventive action was the lack of unity among the democracies that either sought to appease Hitler or to barricade themselves behind declarations of neutrality, even as Germany, Italy, and Japan formed strong pacts with each other. Spain, Portugal, Switzerland, and Sweden declared neutrality, while Norway, Denmark, Luxembourg, and Belgium convinced themselves they had nothing to worry about. And the nation that had brought an end to the First World War, it wanted nothing else to do with Europe's constant conflicts. In 1935, America declared neutrality, which lasted until 1941. How much different it could have been in Europe, said Friedrich Kellner after German troops invaded Poland, if the North American people had shown themselves to be more heroic. How can a people be so short-sighted and ignore the rest of the world because they're protected by oceans? Where humanity and justice are crushed with such cruelty as Hitler and his cohorts have pressed upon Europe, no one can remain neutral. The entire world must rise up and disarm them. A year later, in June 1941, a thoroughly exasperated Friedrich wrote, "Even today, there are idiots in America who talk nonsense about some compromise with Germany under Adolf Hitler. They are the most atrocious dummies. As Churchill said, whoever feeds the crocodile will also be devoured. Every nation must view the situation as if it were being attacked. Is that really so difficult to grasp? No deliberations, no resolutions, no rhetoric, no neutrality. Advance against the enemy of mankind." 6 months after that, on December 8, 1941, the day President Franklin Roosevelt gave his "A Date Which Will Live in Infamy" speech, Friedrich asked, "Now will the isolationists in the USA open their eyes? What a delusion these cowardly people were under. How can you stand on the sidelines claiming neutrality during this gigantic fight for human dignity and freedom when in actuality that places you on the side of the terrorist nations?" Those are some of the hard truths in the Kellner Diary about an unnecessary war that took the lives of 50 million people but could have been prevented. It's easy to see now, with hindsight, some of the intensive preventive measures that could have been taken. England's naval blockade of Germany, plus severe restrictions in trade and a complete ban on certain raw materials, should have been put in place years earlier. justified by the combination of Hitler's aggressive declarations during his political campaigns throughout the 1920s that are published in his book Mein Kampf, and by the massive buildup of war material in the 1930s and the wide-scale crimes against his own people in the euthanasia programs, and the abuse of Germany's Jews that led to the national frenzy of Kristallnacht that would be a prelude to the Holocaust. There was more than enough to realize, as Friedrich Kellner did, that Hitler was intent on war, determined to avenge Germany's loss of the First World War, and then to steal territory from Czechoslovakia, Poland, and Russia, and to mercilessly eliminate his perceived enemies. And if these restrictions had been done with complete agreement and unity among the democratic nations, there quite likely would not have been the need to consider the ultimate intensive measure, to have had to come to grips with the moral quandary of saving the many by sacrificing a few. The most vital thing is to take action before it is too late. In matters of life and death, you can't keep kicking the can down the road, blithely hoping matters will resolve themselves. Where were men who could recognize the reality? Friedrich asked. No deliberations, no resolutions, no rhetoric, no neutrality. Advance against the enemy of mankind. I have to smile when I hear my grandfather like that. He sounds like a warmonger, but he wasn't. Friedrich Kellner was a pacifist, a social democrat pacifist who called for total worldwide disarmament. In an entry on October 9, 1940, he wrote, "The root of evil is war. Overarmament has always led to war." He was against war because he experienced it. He was a sergeant in an infantry regiment in the Kaiser's army in the First World War and was wounded in battle in the trenches of France. That's what turned him to politics. He and my grandmother Pauline dedicated 12 years of their lives campaigning politically against the Nazis. Friedrich preferred political solutions and diplomacy, but Hitler showed the futility of diplomacy and politics when it comes to fanatics whose warped ideologies would undo centuries of civilization. And it became painfully clear to Friedrich that when the world is up against someone like an Adolf Hitler or any fanatic determined to impose totalitarian rule on everyone, he must be stopped, or those who fail to stop him will share the blame for the terrible things he does. There is a great deal more in my opposition on so many topics. The handwritten diary has almost 900 pages and includes more than 500 newspaper clippings. The index in the Cambridge edition has over 1,500 subject headings. My next video, which is almost ready for uploading, will introduce you to Friedrich Kellner's neighbors and what he thought of his fellow citizens' overwhelming approval of the Nazi agenda, no matter how vicious it got. For example, "This is a great and glorious time," shouted Frau Anna Joachim to Friedrich when she heard that the Luftwaffe had destroyed Polish cities. You'll find Frau Joachim in that video. I hope you'll watch the other video I already have on YouTube. It's called "The Little Lutheran Lady Who Battled the Nazis on Kristallnacht." I first published this story about my grandmother in the New York Daily News, which is available online, but the video has more detail and a host of pictures. In any case, I'm grateful that you watched this video, and I do thank you.